Hi, this is Randy Spivey, the CEO of CPPS, the Center for Personal Protection and Safety. And I want to talk just for a few minutes about the increasing wave of violence that we're seeing spread across our country and in some cases outside the United States as well. But if you look at some of the incidents that have happened just in the last 8 weeks here in the United States, it's pretty startling. 8 weeks ago in Buffalo, New York, you had 10 people killed in a grocery store, many more injured. There was a shooting that was racially motivated in Laguna Woods, California, that resulted in an individual being killed and others injured. The horrible shooting that we saw happen in Uvalde, Texas, at Robb Elementary School with 19 kids and 2 adults being shot and killed in that horrible tragedy. And just one note on that, I mean, we've seen school shootings happen, for many years, but not very often in a K through 6 environment. Tulsa, Oklahoma, a disgruntled individual went into the hospital, shot and killed the surgeon who he was upset with and several other individuals in the hospital. Dallas, Texas, they had an incident that almost turned into a tragedy where an armed gunman approached a kids camp outside of Dallas, Texas, and he was intercepted and shot and killed before he got into where the 150 children were located at. Alabama, another shooting, 2 people killed in an Episcopal church. And then, of course, the horrible tragedy we saw happen here at the 4th of July parade outside of Chicago. So obviously people recognize that violence is pretty intense right now. But what I wanted to talk about a little bit is the impact that it has on the average person and how can training help alleviate some of the anxiety and fear. And if you were to say, well, the violence is an epidemic that's spreading around the country, how do we inoculate people against the violence or the fear and anxiety that comes from the perception that it could happen to them? So one of the things that we've done here for years at CPPS is talk about how do we help protect people, in their workplace or in society, to either protect them from violence from happening on a prevention side or what to do if violence does actually occur. And because we're seeing this epidemic that's going across, it's not just an inner city issue, it's happening everywhere. And it's happening with increased frequency and an increased intensity. I wanted to talk a little bit about why it's so important that we train our citizenry in how they can play a role in preventing this from happening and empowering them on what to do if they find themselves in a situation where violence does erupt. And so I think what's happening is you're seeing an increase in fear and anxiety as people watch day after day, incident after incident, happening in grocery stores, churches, houses of worship. They're seeing it happen in movie theaters, a parade of all things, places that people would go to gather and to enjoy, their time with their families are now turning into places of extreme tragedies. Well, what that's doing is it's creating a sense of fear and anxiety for the average person. And in fact, the American Psychological Association, prior to COVID, the number one source of anxiety and stress for the average American adult were mass shootings. And, during the pandemic, it became healthcare and personal health. But now I guarantee you these mass shootings is reaching back up towards the top of the list. And what happens is if people are in a state of fear and anxiety for an extended period of time, then it can lead itself to a sense of helplessness. And helplessness, if it's not resolved, can lead into a sense of hopelessness. So helplessness being, I can't do anything about this. Hopelessness being, and I never will. It's never going to change. Well, I think there are more and more people that are feeling a sense of helplessness when it relates to violence in our society. So the opposite of helplessness would be empowerment. And so the question then being, well, how do we empower people in the areas that they're starting to feel helpless with? And I think that's done primarily through equipping people with an understanding of how they can be an active participant in preventing violence and then responding to it if it occurs. And that only happens through education and training in our experience. And if you thought about that, the fear, not just the violence, but the fear and anxiety that it's creating, and that then leading to a sense there's nothing I can do about it, or that helpless feeling. The way you would reverse that is through helping people to understand what is my role and are there any things that I can do. Well, of course, we know that from being security practitioners that there are things that they can do, but if they don't know what they are, they really are in a sense they are helpless. So what are some of the things that we can equip just our average citizens with? Number one would a couple examples would that people don't just snap. Right after the shooting here in the 4th of July parade, and this is pretty common, you'll have neighbors or family members that say there were no warning signs. Well, you just take a quick snapshot of the shooter here at the 4th of July parade, as well as down in the Texas K through 12 school or K through 6 school. There are all kinds of red flags. In fact, some might even say they were neon lights. This rapper and some of the music he was putting out and some of the messaging. And the more they dig into this, the more they're going to find there were a lot of warning signs. In fact, even police showing up because he was reported being suicidal. So one of the things that we know is that people don't snap. And again, we know that as security practitioners, but the average person out there, they don't know that because that messaging oftentimes becomes, that people just snap and they act out of the blue or a lightning bolt. Another one is that, violence can be prevented in many cases, not always, but in many cases when there are those red flags and if people are educated enough to know what they are and then what to do about it, then there's an opportunity for intervention and hopefully preventing. And it's hard to measure prevention. How many hundreds or thousands of incidents are prevented that people don't even know about, they just see with the ones that aren't. We, having been in this business now for almost 20 years, we have many case studies of major incidents and major attacks that actually were prevented and that never occurred. But a lot of times people, when they start feeling helpless, they don't realize, there are things that you can look for. There are warning signs. There are places you can report it to, whether it's in your workspace or it's in your school or it's in your community. There are hotlines that you can report to, and that those are opportunities to try and let somebody know to try and get ahead of these things and prevent them from happening. Another important one is that there's a big difference between trained and untrained individuals and how they respond, both in the preventative cycle as well as in the crisis itself. When we were in the government, in the military, training people how to deal with real extreme situations, like a kidnapping, for example, one of the things we knew is that about 10% of people in a crisis without training are going to be able to respond effectively. About 10% of people with training are going to respond ineffectively or they're going to mess it up. And I think we've seen a couple examples of that where in a crisis you've had trained individuals that have done the wrong thing. But it's that 80% in the middle that you can train and equip people on how to respond effectively in a crisis, whether that crisis is an active shooter, a bomb, a natural disaster, it could be whatever the crisis. The training and equipping of them on what their options are is critical. And part of that is because, another point to train people on is that, before first responders arrive, it's your family member or it's your coworkers that are what we call immediate responders. And if they understand that they're the immediate responders, that's what they do or don't do in that movie theater or in that grocery store or in that church on Sunday, is what's going to make the difference between them getting out or not. Because it could take 5-10 minutes for law enforcement. Again, we understand that as security professionals and practitioners, but the average person doesn't. And so without the training and understanding, they either are startled and afraid and freeze, or they just react. And again, we've seen many, many case studies like Virginia Tech shooting, like the shooting at the Pulse nightclub. Anytime where you see, multiple casualties in a closed confined area like like I said, a couple examples would be that nightclub shooting where a person's in a closed confined area and you have 49 people killed, over 100 shot. There were opportunities where they could have done something. Now, there are other incidents where it's not that way. And but still, it's the immediate responders that have to be able to push through the fear and be able to respond effectively. So, but if people don't know what their options are, whether it's run, hide, fight, or figure out, get out, hide out, take out, whatever, terminology you want to use, it's equipping people with the understanding that, I'm responsible for my family. I'm responsible for what I'm going to do here. Whatever I do, I'm not going to just sit here and freeze. and to be able to do that with a level of understanding. The more you can do that and equip people with that level of understanding, what happens is it begins to inoculate people against the fear and anxiety. So not only does it increase the chances that they're going to survive and save lives, that is an outcome, but it empowers people to be able to go about living their lives without that constant nagging fear that I hope this never happens to me because I would have no idea what to do, or I'm scared to send my child to school because I think head off to college because they have no idea what to do. Through that understanding, it actually empowers people. They still might find themselves in a very startling situation if they ever find themselves in that crisis. But then what happens is through that training and understanding, it comes back to them that these are my options. And not only does it increase the likelihood that they'll get through the crisis, but it lessens the chances they'll find themselves in extreme PTSD and trauma afterwards. So I know that's a lot to be able to talk about, this wave of violence. But I think what's starting to happen is not only is the violence, taking people out, but it's starting to create a real sense of fear, anxiety, and affecting people's life choices. And so if that's the outcome and that's the virus, the antidote or the vaccine or the antivenom, if you want to use that analogy, to that fear and anxiety is actually empowering people with a realistic understanding of how violence progresses and what their options are if they find themselves in the crisis. So if you have any more questions on resources, how do we equip our people in our church? How do we equip people in our schools without scaring them? They're already scared. What we're doing is actually coming against that fear by equipping people, and we have a lot of tools to do that. So you can reach us at info@cpps.com. But I want to just take a few minutes to talk about that because everything it looks like on the horizon is trending up, the violence. And I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. And so the more we can do to inoculate our people, inoculate our family members with an understanding of how we can prevent this from happening and respond to it if it does, the more effective we're going to be. All right, thank you.